Hello, Mr. Langlois. This is going to be my presentation on The Waiter's Wife, in how, in its being an excerpt from Smith's 21st century epic, White Teeth, she explores the range of contemporary themes such as war, history, race, ethnicity, and gender. We'll be diving into some of the ways that The Waiter's Wife, in some ways condensed, in others maybe more overt, interrogates a lot of these themes through the characters and the overall surrounding in the history of the time in post-colonial London. One of the themes that is brought up throughout Zadie Smith's The Waiter's Wife is war, and it's quite relevant to the characters. The two main characters that is relevant to, of course, being Archie and Samad. Samad is someone who's kind of living in the past a little bit as he goes throughout his days living as a waiter under his cousin. As Samad goes about, he's criticized by the younger waiters such as Shiva for not really knowing how to do a waiter's job. He feels as if Samad is living through his past and has that placard that is not really there. The placard that says that I am a Muslim who has been forsaken by Allah, or that I have forsaken Allah. I am a man in his 40s who has fought in many wars for the English, and he feels the need to say all those things, and he wishes that he had that on his chest at all times. The important part of that being that he was in the war, and that is something that lives with Samad throughout the story of The Waiter's Wife. Samad plays a large role in the first half, and his wife plays the latter half, hence the title The Waiter's Wife, the waiter being Samad, and the wife being Alsana. So to continue on the topic of war, Samad and Archie fought in World War II, which is noted to be a forgotten war, which we know all more. The Second World War has not been forgotten. It still leaves a large impact on our society for the atrocities that it had caused. Their friendship dated back all the way back to World War II, and as aforementioned, Samad tells customers of his participation in the war, amongst other things about himself. Any time that things are mentioned, such as Delhi, for example, he notes that he went to Delhi University, and that in going to Delhi University he also fought in the war. It's important that he highlights the war throughout this story. Samad also is living in the past of this forgotten war, as according to Alsna. And while war is one of the many themes that is present through the story and is later connected in many of the other themes, history also plays a large role in The Waiter's Wife. Upon his reunion with Archie, Samad notes how long it has been since the war, as opposed to since he has seen him last. This is very important because whenever Archie meets him, he says long time no see, and Samad clearly distincts that it's been not long since he's seen Archie, but rather long since he's had blood-stained hands in the war. This once again ties back into the theme of war and how Samad is always thinking back as if he is living in the past. This is further reinstated in one of the last lines said by Alsna, in where she says that her fathers, the fathers of her children, this of course is going to be Samad, and she's talking to Clara, who is the wife of Archie, who is also a father who is like a daddy long legs, and where they will always have one foot in the past and 1 foot in the present. Although it certainly seems as if Samad might nearly have both his feet in the past, for he hardly lives for the present. He forsakes his life, and he's clearly not happy with the present that he lives in, so he chooses to live vicariously through the past. War, not something that many would want to relive. Archie finds himself, not Archie, sorry, but Samad finds himself stuck back in that past. Other things of the history of the time are noted through symbols like the piss pot, and how Shiva notes that the piss pot is just like communism, as his hard worked earnings are split and shared a million different ways for the losers who did nothing. This is a tribute to maybe how the Russians of the time under communist rule, also China and other large powers that followed communism, where it is to be split amongst many, and that the hard-working few carry the loads and have to wear this backpack carrying the losers of the remainder of the population. Shiva clearly not for this. It is also noted, and a large talking point throughout the story of the waiter's wife, that where they live in London is either a good place or a bad place based on the time of post-colonial London. Samad notes that East London would not have been a place to raise his children without them being subject to bodily harm. This is a result of the National Front gangs that were in that part of town, and later Alsina also shares her view on the east side of London, noting how she would walk past mattresses in the homeless and kids with steel capped boots and kicking in windows. This would not have been a place that Samad and Alsna would have wanted to raise their children, and although Alsna forsakes the fact that they had to move and notes that it may not have been necessary, she later contradicts herself as she leaves the house after her argument with Samad, taking her ugly brown coat in leaving and noting that she contradicts and feels as if that a lot of what she says she doesn't always mean. We'll talk more later about how Alsna says many things that she doesn't really believe, and how she contradicts what she says and how she acts. She does not really live in praxis so as to put thought into action. The north side of London, however, is more liberal and a lot more freeing. It's nice and quiet, it's peaceful. Alsna notes all these things throughout her walk as she walks upon concrete and walks by trees, and despite saying that maybe the park of the area is not so nice, it is certainly more peaceful, and it is one of the many meeting places that she and Clara meet up in. It is also the place where Clara, Alsna, and her niece Nina give a very important talk and have a very important conversation to the story that will later be discussed. Now, while the history did play a vital role and was quite one of the forefront themes, it is nowhere near as highlighted or important as race and ethnicity in The Waiter's Wife. Race and ethnicity are found all throughout the story in a number of ways. Samad shares plenty of things regarding race and ethnicity, and Alsna is more so the focus in regards to these topics. One of the times that race is brought up through Alsna is in her first meeting of Clara at the very beginning of The Waiter's Wife, and she notes that perhaps some black people are friendly. It is very specific that she notes that black people are, in italics, friendly. For Alsna makes exceptions a single exception out of all minorities that she dislikes, and she makes exceptions for this, such as singers or film stars. And now she comes to make the exception in regards to the black people of London in Clara Jones. It's also later noted that she finds it nearly impossible, or rather, she does not, but that it would be rather impossible to ignore the peculiar couple that they make on the bus, being a Bangladeshi small Indian woman who's sitting next to a tall, large in stature, very overt, genuine golden smile, black Clara Jones as they sit side by side on that bus. It's also later noted in the story, once again tying back to the waiter, that is Shiva, and how he could manage to finesse his way in upwards of £15, a large sum of money and a large tip to receive, if he were to find a blubbering white divorcee, were she lonely enough. It's once again important to note how it is mentioned that the divorcee who is going to be generous and give a lot of money is white. This could be an attribution to the fact that the whites were either more generous or more wealthy, or both. It was likely the case in both through his implication, since he is not stating that he is happy for the white woman or feel any amount of sympathy, but rather he's using her as a tool to garner money, which he later has to insert into the piss pot, and is, of course, disgusted once again at the idea that he must share it in a communistic manner. Alsna also notes how she dislikes the idea of her child growing side by side with Archie's child or Claire's child, being that the child will be half black, half white. It was one thing for people to be a person of color and be in a specific race or ethnic group. It's another to have two of them mixed, especially since I'm sure that they are both minorities that, as mentioned before, that Alsna would not like to have to make exceptions for she dislikes the vast majority of minorities. White not being a minority, but mixed race people being a minority. Now, while race, again, is a forefront, it ties much into ethnicity, and ethnicity is something that is largely discussed in Zadie Smith's The Waiter's Wife. Alsna and Samad belong to the Muslim ethnic group, and they represent the East and more traditional part of it. For Alsna is from Bangladesh, she is a Bangladeshi woman, and she holds herself in this tradition of her ways back home. Nina represents the West in modern side of the same group, Nina being the niece of Alsna, despite being only 2 years younger. Now, she notes that she cannot find herself subscribing to the same traditions that her aunt or aunt also subscribes to, such as the regards to marriage. Alsna believes that she does not need to know her husband and that silence is the correct approach to marriage. She believes in this so much that she states that she was not wanting her husband to be in the room for the ultrasound. This is a moment that Nina could not comprehend, especially not in this traditionalist view, despite belonging to the same ethnic group. This is in regards to, but not only the prearranged marriage that Alsna was a part of. Once again, she disagrees with silence in marriage and believes that you must have a voice. referring back to how Alsna contradicts a lot of what she says. She indeed contradicts her belief in silence in marriage, as in fact she's quite the opposite of silent and yells a lot at Samad as they have a large disagreement. This disagreement ties into another one of the themes, potentially one of the most, if not the most important theme, being gender in Zadie Smith's The Waiter's Wife. She talks lots over how Samad does not fight, or he's not the breadwinner. He's not the man who's bringing home as much money as Alsna believes that she should whenever Samad is comes home and has to break the news that he could not get the raise from, he could not get the raise from his cousin. So whenever he arrives, he says that, oh, you're not filling your role, your gender role of being the breadwinner as a man. However, Samad also points out that Alsna is not fulfilling her gender role of being the caretaker of the house and doing things such as cooking, as she buys these tinned spaghettis, nice big trays, and she does not cook the food, for there is a freezer full of lamb and other scrap meats from the restaurant that he brings home so that way they can cook. He notes that his mother would have cooked these things and saved their household money and not spent his earnings on the likes of pre-made food. Now, Alsna then calls out Samad for being a traditionalist in living too far in the past, which is ironic since she does the same in assuming many things about Samad's role in not only their marriage but in society. It is also noted that Samad says that she falls into these fits that are no understatement of her rage at the time, and that this could have been a result of potentially how she was pregnant or her periods in general that come with being a woman. Once again, how Alsna does not want Samad in the room for the ultrasound. She states that it is a lady's business and that a man should not be so involved in a lady's private parts. She also believes that she does not want to be at all involved much in the private parts of Samad. It is later noted in the park that there is not 3 women sitting on the bench, but rather 6 people, as Alsna is having twin boys and Clara is having a girl. Alsna states that it is good that she is having a boy and that it is even better to be having 2 boys, placing emphasis on that it is good to have boys as opposed to having girls. She later notes that the letter M is strong, a character trait of boys, and that thus she shall name her 2 sons after the letter M, Magrid and Milat. Nina then retorts a lot of what Alsna says, noting that she is a little submissive Indian woman, tying submissive to women. This is another gender stereotype that would have been very prevalent at the time, and even now, some people can still be hard stuck in these gender roles and viewing women as nothing more than submissive and the male as the dominant, the alpha to the beta. Nina then later notes that it's a shame that Alsna will be having boys, very contrary to how Alsna feels, stating that they've caused enough chaos for their country. She says that if she were to be having a boy, she would have to seriously contemplate abortion, for they are a gender who have blood-stained hands. Alsna later falls into disbelief of her claims, noting that Nina may be right about men, and perhaps there are no good men, not even the two that are in her belly. She lacks confidence, not only as a country kid, but as a country woman without an education. She notes later, once again as aforementioned, that the father of both her children and Clara's will be Daddy Longlegs with one foot in the past and one in the present. This is a result of them being old men, and she relates back again to the war that they find themselves living in the past. There's more ties to ethnicity throughout this story, such as how Alsna and Clara are emissaries of the modern British family. However, Alsna wants to separate herself from this, despite her and her family being quite a representative of the British family. Yet she is also representing cultural hybridity amongst the Brits and the Muslims. She constantly is trying to separate herself from where she is living and wants to be falling back in the past, similar to Samad in her town of Bangladeshi. Now, Nina was, as mentioned before, more so represents the West in London, in that she demands a form of communication between man and woman in comparison to the silence that Alsna falsely believes, or tries to convince herself and others of those around her that she acts in that manner. They'd even go so far as to call Alsna's beliefs repression, and that it is what keeps a marriage healthy, as an argument to what she says, as she also criticizes her prearranged marriage with Samad. All in all, The Waiter's Wife discusses many different themes that vary from war, race, ethnicity, and gender, and even at times highlights the history of London, as well as immigration for not only Samad, but more specifically Alsna, living in the past of her last country and finds it tough to integrate herself into the modern day London. This is so much as to say that The Waiter's Wife is a culmination of many themes and manages to fit all these themes inside these very well-rounded characters, such as Samad, Nina, and Alsna. The waiter Samad and his wife Alsna represent all these themes and are at the forefront of the 21st century's epic's white teeth as characters that will leave a lasting impression on all those who read and are able to experience the story that is The Waiter's Wife.